Hi, it's me, SK, Nicholas, Stephen. Um, I thought I'd make another video. I mentioned I brought it up in my last video in terms of influences, things that have influenced my artistic sort of vision, and things that have influenced me as a person. You know, books, music, films that that have shaped me as an artist, and also that have shaped me as a person. So I don't really want to make a mental sort of mentally long video, but I just want to sort of bring up a few things that I've got by my side. Um, I think because I like I like people telling me things that they've watched or listened to, that have shaped them, that have shaped their vision. Um, I think it's really interesting to see what drives people, whether it be sort of well-known sort of writers or musicians or people like myself, you know, that are sort of struggling to make sort of to get somewhere. So I've selected some books and a couple of CDs and films that have influenced me, and I just wanted to kind of give a bit of a background information on why, you know, and how I came about sort of finding these things, and just a little, yeah, info on how they have kind of shaped me. Um, So I've got some things here. The first one is an album by probably my favorite band. Well, not my favorite band. I'll come on to that later. But it's the Mars Volta, and they've split now. They split in 2012, I think. But this album, I don't know how to pronounce it. Amputecra. Um, it came out in 2006, and it's not it's not their best album, and it's not like a great album, but it has one song on it, the seventh song, that is probably my favorite song of all time. If I had to pick, this is the back. The artwork's crazy. I love it. But the seventh track on this album is probably my favorite album. Is my favorite track, my favorite song of all time, and it's called Day of the Baphomets. And I mentioned this in one of the last pieces in um, in the journal, in the first volume of Damn Lovers. It was there was an entry that I'd written sort of many years ago, I think from 2009, and I mentioned listening to this song on my way to work, and this song is Day of the Baphomets, and Day of the Baphomets is an insane track. It's about 10 or 12 minutes long, and it's kind of like a sort of a Bohemian Rhapsody of its time. You know, when people say Paranoid Android by Radiohead is kind of like a modern Bohemian Rhapsody, Day of the Baphomets on this album by the Mars Volta Amputecra, it's an incredible song. It's I've never heard anything like it, and I probably never will. Again, if you go into YouTube and you search for Day of the Baphomets by the Mars Volta, it's an amazing epic odyssey that you go on, that when you listen to it. And I remember listening to it, I think for the first time back in about 2009, and I'd never I'd I'd never heard it before, never listened to it, and it's insane. It's the best way that I can describe it. It's an insane epic song. It's There's like three or four distinct sort of parts to it, and lyrically, again, it's way out there. All the lyrics by the Mars Volta were just surreal and completely out there. But Day of the Baphomets, it's like no song I've ever heard. I think you have to listen to it. I can't just sort of say, oh yeah, it's got some great guitar. It's incredible. And when I remember in the early days of me working on the novel, I would listen to Day of the Baphomets on my way to work every morning, and it just filled my head with these incredible visions, and I would take some of those visions and put them into the novel. And I haven't listened to Day of the Baphomets in several months, but every time I do listen to it again, it just it stirs something within me. In one hand, it sort of takes me back to the early days of the novel, and on the other hand, it just fills my head anew with these great visions and images. There's there's an energy to that song. There's an energy to the song. There's a focus. There's something to it that just takes me away, and it's yeah, it's just insane. So yeah, Day of the Baphomet by the Mars Volta on their album Amputechra. It's it's awesome. I would, again, whenever I listen to it, it just completely takes me away. It just completely, I'm overwhelmed by this song. And if I was, I probably will listen to it later. It's best to listen to it, put some headphones on, turn the music up, and just be prepared to experience something that you've never experienced before. It's insane. Um, Another album. So there's a couple of albums here, completely different. It was the very first album I ever owned. I think I think it was a Christmas present. It's Life by the Swedish band The Cardigans. And I don't think the Cardigans are around anymore. They had sort of their heyday in sort of like the mid to late 90s. Loveful, which was on the Romeo and Juliet sort of soundtrack, and they had My Favorite Game, which I think was like used in the Gran Turismo game on the PlayStation. But Loveful, just as an album, it was my very first album, and it's a beautiful album. It's completely sort of, it's a bit twee, and it's a bit sort of like it's poppy, and it's such a wonderful sort of vision, completely different, contrasting to the Mars Volta. But this album has had an effect on me just because it's, again, if I have my dark side of my writing, but I have my light side, and this kind of helped contribute to that. When I very first started listening to music, I was sort of into indie music. I was into sort of punk, the Sex Pistols, Blur, um, Supergrass. But this album, when I first listened to this, I was probably 13. No one in my school was listening to this kind of shit. Everyone was kind of, the school I went to, everyone was just listening to pop music. It was the bland kind of shit. And I was listening to, yeah, the Cardigans, and I stood out like a sore thumb. Still do. But yeah, it was incredible to experience something that nobody else I knew was listening to. And whenever someone was saying what music you listening to, and I said, oh, the Cardigans, it's like, what? But yeah, brilliant music. And if you listen to this album, which is called Life, it came out in, I think, yeah, 95. Still sounds fresh, and it's wonderful. It's such a beautiful, warm album. And again, I could listen to that today, and it would just make me feel sort of really warm inside, and it would just, I would probably go off and write a few really nice, sort of warm, happy pieces. I might try and sort of find these songs and albums on YouTube and put them in a playlist. I have one playlist which is just called sort of writing music, with some Elliott Smith and stuff like that. But yeah, so the Cardigans, just really warm music, really lovely, really twee, and just makes me feel happy when I listen to it. Um, I've got a couple of more albums. I'll do the next one, the next album, the last album. I'll leave to the very last because that's probably had the most impact on me. So third album is by a British musician called Nick Drake, and Nick Drake died in, oh God, I think he died in 74. I think he died in 74, 10 years before I was born. A very tragic musician. He wasn't famous in his lifetime. He died very young. I can't remember how old he was. Late 20s, I think. He wasn't old at all. And he was unknown in his lifetime, really. He didn't really have much success, and I think the last sort of 3 or 4 years of his life he was living with his parents, um, and he overdosed. Some people say that he killed himself. Some people say that it was an accidental overdose. I've read a few biographies of his, and I remember reading one of them. I actually cried when I read this part because it was so touching. Like I said, he recorded these 3 albums, um, and then he sort of withdrew. He was suffered from depression. He smoked a lot of weed, pot, for many Americans watching this, and he was a very introvert character. But the music he created was wonderful. It's so beautiful, and this album, Five Leaves Left, was the first album of his I ever listened to, and it was his first album. And if it's very British, it's very English. If you listen to it, it just completely transports you. If you're an American watching this, again, this is what it's like to be English, I would say. But for me, when I listen to it, it it reminds me of my grandparents, of sort of like endless sort of summer afternoons around my grandparents when I was like 10 or 11, and just that very sort of slow way of life. My nan sort of preparing food in the kitchen, my granddad reading his books in the front room, and me kind of just sort of shuffling around the house as a youngster, playing games and sort of helping my nan, and sort of looking through my granddad's kind of books. And this album is, if it, even when I very first listened to it, I felt like I'd already heard it. It was in my bones. And there's one song on there. This is the back. There's one song on there called Riverman. And Riverman was the very first Nick Drake song that I ever heard. And it winds me down. It relaxes me. It's quintessentially English. And he's got his voice is again very English, and he doesn't sing with like a generic sort of vocals, or he doesn't try to become American. He's as English as you can get, and he was a sort of a folky kind of musician. And although he kind of suffered in his life, he created this wonderful music. And yeah, Riverman, I would say go and check Riverman out. Give it a listen, and I can listen to it now, and it just takes me back. And again, it had an impact on me because it was again, it was someone that was just real. There was no sort of razzmatazz. It was just this guy, a guitar. There's backing strings and stuff like that. But yeah, just someone that he had his vision, and he sung, and he played his guitar, and he was brilliant, beautiful. Again, tragic that he didn't have any sort of real success in his life, and he had his struggles, but it's good that he's kind of got some recognition, many years after his death. What sort of 40 years he's been dead now, over 40 years, Christ. But yeah, wonderful, wonderful musician, and yeah, Five Leaves Left. Pick up a copy or go on YouTube. The second item, I mentioned this book yesterday, Boredom by Alberto Moravia. I've only just realised that I've got 2 copies. I don't know how the fuck that happened. Yeah, I've got 2 copies. There's a receipt in one of them. Literally, I've just taken this out. There's a receipt from 2015. I bought a Blu-ray and some wine. Perfect. So yeah, no idea how I've got 2 copies, but Boredom by Alberto Moravia. If anyone wants a copy, I wouldn't mind sending it to you. I'd forge his signature. But yeah, if anyone does want a copy, I will happily sort of send it to them. I don't know how I've got 2 copies. Yeah. So yeah, Boredom. I remember, I think it was in the summer of 2007, and I went, I think, was it 2007? I think, or no, it was 2005, sorry. And I went to London for the day with my parents. I was at uni, obviously back from uni for the summer, living with my parents, and we went into London for the day, and there's this bookshop. It's probably my favourite bookshop. I haven't been there for a few years. I can't remember what it's called. Daunt's. It's either Daunt's or Gaunt's bookshop in London, and it's not too far from Baker Street. Yeah, it's somewhere near Baker Street, and it's a really nice bookstore. I think there's a couple. There's one there. I think there might be one in Covent Garden. There was one in Covent Garden, and I remember just sort of I'd never heard of Alberto Moravia. It was unknown to me. I don't think he's not like a massively popular author. I don't really hear his name sort of mentioned, but I remember just seeing this title, and I just saw the title Boredom, and I thought that, well, that's grabbed me. Say it like it is. And it's for me, I really resonate with this, probably a lot more now in the intervening years than when I first picked it up. But I'll read the back. I'll probably stumble. I always stumble when I read, but I'll read the back and see what you think. Boredom. The story of a failed artist and pampered son of a rich family who becomes dangerously attached to a young model examines the complex relations between money, sex, and imperial masculinity. Dino is approaching middle age, and he is consumed with boredom, not just a lack of interest in life, but a feeling of profound disconnection with the world at large. A painter, he has given up his art to live from day to day. Then he meets Cecilia, a beautiful and unabashedly sexual, strangely impassive teenage model who becomes his mistress. But as she eludes his increasingly frantic efforts to take control of her body and mind, even to buy her if necessary, his own life spirals dangerously out of control. This powerful and disturbing study in the pathology of modern life is one of the masterworks of a writer who, as Anthony Burgess once remarked, was trying to get to the bottom of human nature. So yeah, again, fail painter, and yeah, when you read it, it is about this guy that is given up painting. He doesn't do anything for him anymore. He feels nothing, and he meets this woman, Cecilia, and at first, again, he says, she means nothing to me. Yeah, she's attractive. Yeah, we're fucking whatever. But when he eludes her, when he feels that he can't have control over her, he spirals out of control and he becomes consumed. He obsesses over this woman. And at the time when I read it, it was a good book. But now I look back and I pick up so much on that. I've always had a distinct sort of lack of interest in not life, but kind of modern life. That the things that people are told to strive for. I've never really sort of been that interested. A good job and money, whatever. And again, it's that obsession, that the fact that when you find someone in your life and you just become obsessed with them to the point where it verges on sort of being unhealthy. And yeah, it's a great book. Again, it's not one. Alberto Moravia is not someone that I hear sort of bandied around his name, and not many people I know have read this book. But yeah, when I first read it, it captivated me just because this guy that just was so sort of disinterested in life, and then something happens in his life and it kind of transforms him. And I've sort of had that with myself, with love, being completely consumed by the love of someone, and then it kind of changing who you are. And that happened with me. A few years ago I was in love with someone who didn't love me back, and it pushed me into writing, and it changed me from being someone that was quite sort of meh. Again, 4 years ago, wasn't really in tune with my emotions, um, was very closed. And then through this incident and through me getting into writing, now I'm a different person. I'm very in tune with my emotions, and that comes out. I'd like to think that comes out in my writing, whether it be sort of writing about things that are tender or beautiful, or writing about the rage and frustration. And I really sort of resonate with this book. I resonated with it back then, and even more so now. So yeah, Boredom. And again, I have 2 copies. No idea, but if anyone did want a copy, um, I'd be more than happy to send it out to them. Um, there's another book. This book, The Gyro Playboy by Michael Smith. This copy was actually given to me by my good friend Jimmy Campkin. There's a little inscription. I'll read it to you. To Stephen, that's me. Merry Christmas 2011. You might find this guy a bit of a bellend, but I love the descriptions of the people he meets. You may recognise some of them from the Dunstable days of Brenda and Muff Daddy, who are characters that we knew. And yeah, he gave this to me as a Christmas present in 2011. The Gyro Playboy, and I'd never heard of him. I'd never heard of Michael Smith. I'd never heard of this book, and it's wonderful. In many ways, again, it's had a big effect on my kind of my writing, my style of writing. When you see his pieces, some of them are very short. Some of the pieces that he writes, it's not like a traditional novel where it's page after page after page. They're broken up, these sort of stanzas, and he puts these illustrations in. So it's very bite-sized. Again, that's something that my writing takes from. I like bite size. I've a very poor attention, span of attention. So this was big for me. Just going through it, it was very easy to read, and it tells the story of this guy that he's a bit of a drifter, and he doesn't sort of really work. He signs on. He's on the dole for most of his time. And he starts off in sort of Brighton, and he goes to Essex, and then I think eventually he goes to London. But it's just his story of being this bum, and he talks about how he stays up late, he wakes up late, he signs on, he's on antidepressants, and he sort of watches daytime TV, and he's a bit of an all-round loser. But yeah, when I first read it after Jimmy Campkin gave me this copy for Christmas, I was like, wow, again, that's a book that I would like to write, just because it was very down to earth, very human, no razzmatazz, no bullshit, just someone that was writing about their life, but sort of capturing these moments that would otherwise be lost, and capturing sort of moments that you're told not to really sort of look for. You're told to be successful and all the rest of it, whereas this guy's saying, actually I'm a bit of a bum, and I sign on and I drink too much and I don't have a healthy sort of lifestyle. And when I read that again, I really sort of I bought into that. It resonated with me. But there was always that hope. He doesn't just write about it and he ends it on a sour note. He writes about it, and you take something from that. There is that hope that this guy's kind of he's been there, and life sucks at times, but you come out of it. But again, it's about the journey. You have to go through those moments. So yeah, the Gyro Playboy. He wrote another book. It's somewhere behind me. I can't see it, but it was called Unreal City, which focused on his time in London, and again, very down to earth, completely relatable. So yeah, I really enjoyed that. There's a couple of films. Um, Most of you probably heard of them, but they've kind of had an influence on me. First one, Pollock. Obviously, biography on Jackson Pollock, painter that has had a massive impact on my sort of art. This film came out in like 2000, stars Ed Harris. Should have won an Oscar for this. I think Marcia Gay Holden, is that her name? The fucking back is in French. I had to get it sort of imported. I can't remember her name. I think it's Marcia. Yeah, Marcia Gay Harden. Almost Rude, but brilliant film. I've read up about Pollock. He influenced my art, my paintings more than any other painter. And this film is incredible. I watched it when I was at uni. I think back in like 2003, 2004 for the first time. And I watch it every now and again, and it's incredible. It really taps into the struggle that Pollock had. You know, Pollock started off, wasn't really that successful. People just sort of dismissed him, and then he came upon this way of painting, which was sort of, people took the piss out of him. You know, at the time, people said this isn't art. You know, that splashing paint on canvas, that's not art. Anyone can do that. But he was an icebreaker. He completely revolutionized sort of what art could be. You know, he's really up there. And this film is incredible. It really captures the desperate struggle that Pollock had. He was an alcoholic, and he was a caged beast. He was a wild animal. And again, he met, like a lot of sort of artists do, he met a sad end. He died in a car crash. He was in a car with his mistress and his mistress's friend, and the mistress's friend, she died. You know, the mistress sort of came away from it relatively well. She lived, and yeah, Pollock died. He was only in his 40s, I think, and very tragic end. But yeah, this film really captures Pollock, really captures someone, the struggle, you know, the artistic struggle, and it captures those euphoric moments of when you stumble across a new way of doing things, and it also, you know, looks at the struggle when your back's against the wall. So yeah, Pollock's a great film. Give it a watch. The second one, most people I think would have heard of this, Eraserhead by David Lynch. Um, Mental film. I've never really tried to really sort of understand it. People kind of give their own sort of views on it. People kind of, you know, they say, oh, it's about this or it's about that. I don't really care for that. I just like the visual feast that it is. It's like a nightmare. It's a dream. It's a nightmare. And every time I sort of watch it, it just pulls me in. And it's very, very strange, and but resonates with me every time I watch it. I just sort of, I'm just pulled into it. And it's that imagery. It's, you know, David Lynch had a vision when he made this film. Like he's had a vision with everything he's ever done, from Twin Peaks to Lost Highway, Mulholland Drive. And I love David Lynch because he has a vision in his head and he sticks to it. And I think that you always buy into it because you know that he's passionate about what he does. You might not understand what he's getting across in his films, but you always buy into it. It's always a labor of love. He always feels what he does. So yeah, Eraserhead wasn't the first Lynch film I watched. I think the first was Lost Highway. But this film, I think every time I watch it, it just pulls me in. And again, it makes me believe that in my visions, I think, you know what, I might not be able to completely articulate how I feel, or what this piece means, but watching stuff like this just makes me think, yeah, I'm going to keep at it, because I think as long as I feel it, it will come out. Uh, there's a couple more books. Fucking hell, half an hour already. I waffle so much. Keith Waterhouse, Jub. I used to say Jube, but I think it's Jub. Um, I I the original copy of this book was stolen. Someone, these two, the next one as well. These two books, the original copies I had, were stolen by thieves, women thieves. Both were stolen by two separate women. Can you believe it? This The original copy of this was stolen by someone I was at university with. So I picked up this copy on Amazon for a penny, 1p, and I spent like £2 on postage and packaging. But Job, I I've never read anything else by Keith Waterhouse. I think he did Billy Liar, which is his really famous work. But Job is a story of a loser. He's a loser. He's a peeping Tom. He's seedy, and he's one of these kind of just dirty characters of society that just sort of, you know, he's the dirty old man. He's the seedy man. And I love this novel. When I says a lot, I know I love this novel when I first read it, because it was like, wow, this is like, again, I've never read anything like this. This is just such a pathetic creature, a poor excuse of a human being. And again, there was no razzmatazz. There's no glitz and glamour. There's no sort of like, it's not like this loser gets trapped in a case of espionage. No, it's just this complete and utter loser, and it's just a document of his life. And I buy into it. It's set in England, so if you're English, you can read this and think, yeah, I've met a few of those characters. I guess you would know these characters in America or anywhere else, but it really sort of paints a good picture of that kind of a sort of a quintessential sort of dirty old Englishman. And again, it had an impact on me because I read it, and at the time I'd never sort of read. Look at that! Look at how sort of like manky the inside is. I'd never really read anything like it. It is actually an old library book, Avon County Library. It doesn't have. I love it when you pick up an old library book and you can see the people that have taken it out, but it doesn't say. But this copy was first published in 1963. This was published in 86. This copy. I think it's out of print now. So you might have to pick it up off eBay or something. But yeah, just a really sort of mundane character. But I love the fact that it went into this mundane character's life. This wasn't a character that was amazing or had some kind of ability. He was just Jubb was this loser, but he was interesting, and I think losers are interesting. I'd much rather be identified as a loser than just some bland sort of successful non-entity. Again, who wants to just sort of disappear into the system? I'd much rather stand out and sort of be a loser and a loner, because these characters are, they're different and they're unique, and that's why that always resonated with me. This book was stolen again by another lady who shall remain nameless, and The Shrine of Jeffrey Dahmer. So this isn't my original copy. The original copy had a picture of Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer was a serial killer, and he killed homosexual men. And in, I think, oh God, Minnesota? Was it Minnesota? Oh shit, or was it Wisconsin? I can't remember. It doesn't say on the back. Minnesota or Wisconsin, I think. And yeah, he killed homosexual men. He often picked them up from gay bars, and he murdered them, and he sort of slept with them, and he tried at one point, he tried to inject sort of homemade serums into a living person's skull to turn them into zombies so that he could sleep with them. Completely, utterly insane. And yet he was found guilty. And and it's like, if there was one individual that I've ever read that was not sane, it was Jeffrey Dahmer. Completely and utterly insane. But I picked this book up when I was at uni. Had a massive effect on me just because it was written by Brian Masters, who wrote a book on the guy in London, Dennis Nilsen, who was kind of like the British version of Jeffrey Dahmer. Dennis Nilsen's still alive. Jeffrey Dahmer was killed in prison. Not long, only a few years after he was found guilty. Someone bashed his brains in with I think with a barbell or a dumbbell. But yeah, it had a massive effect on me because when again, Jeffrey Dahmer, abhorrent individual, very bad person. He killed innocent people. That's not good. But when you read up about the fantasy life, serial killers quite often have very rich fantasy lives. And there's this thing of, does the fantasy fuel the crimes, or does the crime fuel the fantasy? And this Brian Masters does an incredible job at really sort of understanding Jeffrey Dahmer. He empathizes with him. He sort of sympathizes with him, and he says, look, Jeffrey Dahmer was a bad motherfucker. There's no sort of getting over that. And yet this guy was insane. And he interviewed sort of Dahmer when Dahmer was in prison. And Dahmer sort of opened up and he talked about his sort of fantasy life. And again, incredible. When I first read it, I was just like, my God, this guy was just completely and utterly out there. And it's horrible to read about what he did to those guys that he picked up. And but at the same time, it's just like, wow, that's that's weird. Again, give this a read. Even if you're not into true crime, this book is very odd. A little fact: I've had pet rats in the past, not for a few years now, but I had a pet rat called Dharma, who was named after Jeffrey Dahmer. Very odd. It's a kind of thing that 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 would be held against me at some point in my life. But yeah, I had a pet rat called Dharma. I don't know if there's I don't think there's any images on Instagram. I might put an image up of on Instagram of Dharma. I think he died in 2013. Very sad. I like Dharma. But yeah, Shrine of Jeffrey Dahmer. Give it a read. It's brilliant. I've got two items left. This film was introduced to me by my friend Anthony, who I worked with in High Wycombe. Obviously, still in contact with. I meet up with him sort of during the summer for a weekend during the summer for the past 3 years. We've met up. I've gone back down to High Wycombe and we spent the weekend together with uh, a few other friends. My friend James. Enemy by it's starring Jake Gyllenhaal, and Jake Gyllenhaal is one of my favourite actors from Donnie Darko. I would have picked Donnie Darko because that has probably had more of an effect on me than any other film. But again, I thought Donnie Darko is people have probably heard of that more than Enemy. So yeah, Donnie Darko is kind of that's that you take that as read. But Enemy by Jake Gyllenhaal, I had this shit from Germany. There's the cover, the DVD sort of cover, the generic one is absolutely shit. It looks like a sci-fi film. But whereas this one, that's I love that cover. And I look at if you again just look at that cover. That explains a lot about the film. It's this is what do you call it, a steel case. Uh, it's an amazing film. Anthony suggested it to me. He said, "Watch this film. The ending is mental, but watch this film." And it's incredible. It's based on a book by Saramago. I can't remember his first name. Joseph Saramago. I think he wrote a book called Blindness, which is a really good novel. Read that a few years ago. But Enemy, the book's called The Double. I started reading it. I couldn't really get into it. The language was a bit too for me. But this film is awesome. Not everyone's cup of tea, but I can't really explain too much about it without sort of giving it away. But it's Jake Gyllenhaal discovers that he has a double. He has a doppelganger, and it's about how these two sort of doppelgangers, these two doubles, kind of interact. And obviously, Jake Gyllenhaal plays both of them in the film, and there's symbolism in the film that is very hard to miss, but it's there. And the ending is the ending of the film is awesome. It's again, I'm not going to spoil it for you, but Anthony said to me, "Watch the ending, let me know what you think." And I watched it, and I was like, and then the credits rolled, and I was like, "What?" But I watched it a few more times, and it's there. There's this symbolism there. It's a work of art, and there are certain things that are mentioned, and the, certain imagery used. And then when you look at the ending again, you kind of go, "Ah, I see what I see what that is." Because I think again, a lot of people saw the ending and were like, "What the hell?" But yeah, brilliant film, really interesting, psychological, great performances by Jake Gyllenhaal playing these two sort of versions of himself. Again, versions. I use that. I talk about that in my recent work, but it's incredible. The last item is an album, and it's probably had the biggest sort of effect on me as a painter, as a writer, as a human being. I first listened to this album when I was 16, maybe 16, something like that, 16, 17. I'd heard of this band beforehand, but I'd never really sort of taken much notice of them. I'd heard their stuff on the radio, and I'd thought, oh, okay, yeah, all right, whatever. I'd never really got into them, and then I purchased this magazine. I think it's still out. I think it's still in publication, but it's called the Q Music magazine, and it used to be a lot more about sort of indie alternative music. I think it then drifted to mainstream. I think that the minute that it put Beyonce on the cover, I just stopped getting it. But they had an article. I think I actually bought that copy of Q Music magazine with Jimmy, and it was the 50 most heaviest albums ever made, and there was In Utero, you know, there was albums by Wire, Marilyn Manson, Nine Inch Nails, King Crimson. It introduced me to King Crimson, their album Red, um, and it had an album by this band, and I thought, what? You know, how does that make sense? How are they a heavy band? Because I just heard their sort of music on the radio, and again, nice pop music, but I thought, how can that be heavy? And I read up the little sort of description it had, and it said this album deals with prostitution, it deals with genocide, it deals with the Holocaust, it deals with self-harming, and it said the lead lyricist and guitarist, shortly after the album was completed, he disappeared and he was been presumed dead. And I was like, what? How? This makes no sense. So this album, I own sort of a few copies. It's the Holy Bible by the Manic Street Preachers. It was released in 1994. This is a painting by Jenny Saville, who's a successful sort of painter. So this is the 2 CD copy, the 10th anniversary edition, and then, because I'm a sad bastard, this is I think it was the 20th anniversary edition. So again, you can see that it's awesome. And they have all the songs sort of underneath it. Again, the Triptych by Jenny Saville, the Holy Bible by the Manic Street Preachers. This is the vinyl copy. I'm not going to take it all out, but there's a brilliant sort of booklet, photos of the band and lyrics and everything. So yeah, I read this article, and it said that this album was one of the heaviest albums ever made, and I was like, makes no sense. This band aren't heavy. And I asked for the album for Christmas, and I think I got it in like the year 2001. And I remember the first time I ever listened to this album. I didn't like the band, you know, before that, but I listened to this band. I listened to the album, and it was like, holy shit. And I still feel like that to this day. I mean, again, it was released in 1994. I first listened to it probably about 6 or 7 years later, and I'm still listening to it now, and it's my favorite album of all time. It's incredible. There's focus, there's energy, there's pain, there's drama. Every single song, every single one of those 13 songs is just awesome. I can't even when I go back to it now, you know, sort of 15 years or so after I first listened to it, it hits me. This is a band. The Manic Street Preachers, for those who don't know, are a Welsh band. They're still going strong. They've released many albums now, and they came out sort of at late 80s, early 90s. A lot of people slagged them off. They were a very sort of outspoken band, and they released their first album, Generation Terrorists, and it was a good album, but people sort of went, it's all right. They released a second album, Gold Against the Soul, and people sort of went, yeah, it's all right, but And then they released this third album, The Holy Bible, and they've, you know, the surviving members have said that when it came to making this album, they just thought, you know what, fuck it, we're not going to release an album to try and impress people, because, you know, this was the 90s, this was Blur, this was Radiohead, this was Pulp, this was Oasis, Britpop was in bloom. You know, there was this feel good factor about British music in the 90s. The Manic Street Preachers pissed all over that, and I've met maybe a handful of people that like this band, even though they've sold, you know, millions of copies. They've had dozens of sort of top 10, top 20 hits. They've had number one singles, number one albums. They're a they're a Marmite band. Many people I've met don't like them. They see them as being a pretentious band. They haven't got any time for them. But fans of the band are mental. You know, Manic Street Preachers fans are obsessive because they're a brilliant band. So yeah, the band made this music this album, and they've said that they didn't care. They just wanted to make an album for them. They weren't trying to impress people. They weren't trying to get in on the Britpop scene. They just wanted to make an album for them. And the lead lyricist was a guy called Richie Edwards, and he's been missing. Well, I think he's been legally declared dead now for several years. But he disappeared shortly after the album was made, and Richie Edwards was this beautiful soul, like Nick Drake. He was a very tender, very sort of delicate kind of soul, but he was troubled, and he was a self-harmer. He was an alcoholic. He obviously suffered from depression and a whole host of issues. But he was deeply intelligent, and he didn't just write lyrics. He was a poet in his own right. And the lyrics on this album, nothing I've ever heard has ever come close to this. And I'm not just saying it as now as a Manic Street Preachers fan. When I first heard this and I didn't care much for the band, I just went, whoa, that's not lyrics. Again, listen to it. Go. I think the album is there on its entirety on YouTube. It's probably on Spotify. You can probably pick up a copy of this quite cheaply. Listen to I mean, the whole album itself is brilliant. It's musically, it's a tremendous album, but the songs were built around the lyrics, and Richie Edwards wrote sort of 75% of the lyrics for this album. The other sort of 25 were written by Nicky Jones, and but yeah, so Richie wrote the lion's share of the lyrics, and he didn't just write lyrics, he was a poet in his own right. And when I first listened to this album and I was listening to the lyrics, it's like nothing you will ever hear. The band have changed a lot now. The band are still going on. The lead, you know, the lead vocalist sings. He doesn't really sing in this. Listen to it. He shouts, and he tries to make Richie's lyrics kind of somehow fit around the music. He makes the music fit around the lyrics. It was a revelation when I first heard it, because I didn't know that music could sound like that. Again, I came out of my indie days of the Cardigans and Blur, Moloko, Supergrass, which was more sort of traditional music. And when I heard this album, I was like, what? This isn't anything I've ever heard before. And yeah, lyrically, it's a very dark album. Self-harming, prostitution, genocide, serial killers, the Holocaust. It's a very, very dark album. And it's one thing I took from that straight away was the fact that as a 16-year-old, 17-year-old, I thought, I'd love to make an album like that. I'd love to produce a piece of art that was as focused and as strong and as vivid as that album. And I still do now. Obviously, I failed as a musician, but that's another story for another day. But when it comes to my own personal sort of art, my writing, I want to be able to create something that has as much drive and as vision as this album. It's from the very first song. It just takes me in. Even now, much the same now as it did sort of, I don't know, 16, 17 years ago. it brings me in. It makes no apologies. It doesn't try to win friends, this album. It doesn't try to be pretty. It doesn't try to do anything like that. It's just a band. You see the band on the back there. Richie is this guy. He's a very good looking chap. He was. This band just, they thought, fuck you. We're making an album for us. We don't care who likes it. This is who we are. And it's incredible. It's intellectual, but it's poignant. It's a triumph of art over logic. It's just it's a punch in the face. Again, lyrically, you listen to the lyrics on album single songs such as Faster, If White America, every single song really. You just listen to it and the lyrics just come at you. Listen to Faster. If you don't listen to anything else from the Manics, listen to the song Faster. Go into YouTube, watch the music video. Boom. I think you'll be impressed. And again, so many people I've met over the years don't like this band because they see them as being a bit intellectual, a bit sort of, they're unpopular as well. They're popular in the sense they've had a lot of success, they've sold millions of records, but they're not kind of a band that, you know, youngsters would kind of like get into because, oh, the Manics, oh, they're a bit this, that, and the other. But for me, whenever I kind of meet someone and they say they like the Manics, I'm like, I'm your friend. You can spit in my face. You can call me all manner of things. If you like this band, you are my friend. Because this is a vision. This band had a vision. You know, they've carried on. They've made many albums, over a dozen albums, I think. They're still making music today. I enjoy it. I think they're a great band. But that album, it had an effect on me as an artist. I instantly thought I want to create something that is as driven and as focused as this. And it affected me as a human being because again I love listening to that music, and for my time that I was listening to it at sixth form, college, at university, I would listen to that every day. And it affected me. It just made me realize that there is something there, that if you have a vision, don't sacrifice things for that vision. If you have something that you need to say it. Don't worry about offending people. Don't worry about alienating yourself or pissing people off. If you've got something to say, if you've got a vision, then you need to get it out there. You need to stay true to your vision. And that's what this album kind of said. It spoke to me, and it still speaks to me now. I will probably listen to this later today, and again, I'll try and sort of put some of this music on a sort of a playlist on YouTube. So if you are sort of on, then it's there for you. But yeah, this album is awesome. It's incredible. It's, again, not many people I know like them, but this album has done more to me than anything else. It's it's a vision. I would love to be able to create something that I could say, this is me, this is my vision, nothing else is important. I hope that I achieve that with the second volume of Damn Lovers. That's, as I've mentioned in previous videos, I really want it to be my truth. I really want to say, this is who I am, this is what I am, and I'm not sacrificing, you know, my vision. It's there. If you don't like it, then whatever. But this is my vision, and I think I get that mentality from this band, from this album. And so yeah, I would definitely say, listen to it. Listen to a few tracks. You know, Faster, Archives of Pain. Yes, I don't think you will be disappointed because again, there is a vision, and there's just this. Oh, so it makes me shiver thinking about it. Yeah. So this is my holy grail, the Holy Bible by the Manic Street Preachers. This album it speaks to me more than anything, more than any other book, more than any other film, more than any other album. This work of art speaks to me more than anything. Um, Yeah, it's incredible. I was only gonna try and make a 30-minute video. I've gone on for 55 minutes. Christ, I waffle. But yeah, so I've shared these things with you. I'm hoping that maybe you might kind of look at one of them, get this one, but any one of those books, CDs, films. I'd love it if you were to kind of think, oh, you know what, I'll check that out. I'll go on Amazon, I'll go on YouTube, I'll go on eBay. I'd love it if you did sort of get into them, because these have been a sort of a cream of the crop of things that have influenced me. Obviously, there are so many other different things, but those ones in particular sort of really resonate with me. And I love finding out things, influences of fellow sort of writers, professional, independent, struggling musicians, whatever. I always like to see what inspires certain people, what moves people to do what they do. Um, so yeah, this little crop has been my kind of fire for certain periods of my life, and continuing going forwards in my life. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this video. Um, the next one I make probably will be, hopefully, when I get the proof copy. Um, I might do a one before that. I was thinking of making a video about the sudden denouement. I say sudden denouement. I believe it's sudden denouement. It's sudden denouement. The literary collective that I'm a member of. I was going to sort of just make a video about sort of my time as being a member with them, from how it came about and going forwards. So I'll make that. Maybe that will be my next one, but I'll definitely make one when I get the proof copy, if it comes. Again, next Wednesday or Thursday, you're either going to see a video of me holding up the proof copy of Damn Lovers, kind of talking about it, saying, yeah, I think you should buy a copy of this book, or you're going to see me running around naked, punching myself in the face, and just really drunk and falling over. Uh, yeah, I think you'd want to go for the book. But yeah, so I'm SK Nicholas. I apologise for going on so long, but yeah, it's been a pleasure. I've enjoyed this. I've enjoyed talking about my influences, the things that have influenced my vision and me as a person. So yeah, I hope you've liked this video. I hope it's given you something. If I can give you something, if you can just take from one book, from one CD or whatever, I would have achieved something. So yeah, I hope you liked it. And I'm going to shoot off now. 57 minutes. I'm very tired. I'm going to have a cup of tea. Can you see that can of Red Bull there? I thought that I'd shifted this so that it wouldn't capture it, but there's an empty can of sugar-free Red Bull. Dreadful, awful, awful human being that I am. But yeah, so I'm off for a week now anyway. I had my shift. I'm gonna take it up to an hour. I did my last shift at work. I've got 10 days off. Hopefully, I'm going to sort of gear up to the second journal, come in and tweaking sort of social media accounts, publicize it a bit, just hopefully spread the word. When I finished work today, I treated myself. I spent £50 on myself. I bought a bottle of wine. I bought a pizza, and I spent about £40 on pajamas and underwear. How rock and roll is that? I honestly, I bought some boxes, so a couple of packets of boxes, some packets of socks. I bought a nice sort of like a sweatshirt, pajama shirt thing. I bought some pajamas because if I could, I would just wear pajamas everywhere I go. When I get home from work, I sort of just change into pajamas. If I don't have to go out, if it's a day off, I don't even get changed out of my pajamas. I'm a lazy bum. So yeah, I treated myself to £40 worth of pajamas and underwear. That's rock and roll. I am Mr. Rock and Roll. So yeah, I'll watch a film tonight. I'll probably watch um, American Werewolf in London. It's somewhere up there. I got the HD remastered, restored version. I imported it from Canada. So I'll watch that tonight. I'll write something, And yeah, I might make another video, maybe on Sudden Dunamar. I will do one, but I don't know if it'll be before or after the proof copy of Damn Lovers 2. I'm so tired. Talking like this for an hour really knackers me. I hope you're well. Be good to people. Be good to animals. Stroke an animal today. Stroke a cat. Stroke a dog. Stroke a rat. Because animals are pure, and humans are kind of dirty, and we're cruel and we're unkind. I'm SK. God bless.